Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the TF podcast where we discuss technology and finance, and that typically revolves around Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and blockchain. My name is Jonathan G. Blanco. I'm excited for my next guest. We're going to be discussing things like commerce and the role of Bitcoin in commerce. You probably know his company very well, Lolli. You can get sats back for purchases. So with that, Alex Adelman, I'd love if you could introduce yourself to everybody.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
My name is Alex. I'm one of the founders of Lolli, and we've created the easiest way for people to get Bitcoin when they do something as simple as shop online.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I use Lolli myself. It's definitely pretty simple to use. Curious, did you have a background in just commerce or loyalty, or how did you all come up with this?
Yeah, so we built, my team and I, we built a company, started about 8 years ago called Cosmic. And we created this pretty novel solution that let merchants sell their products anywhere. So it actually had a very similar thesis to Bitcoin, which was how do we democratize commerce? And when we hadn't heard about Bitcoin, but we very much had this mission that was like centered around giving everyone in the world the ability to buy and sell anywhere. And when we learned about Bitcoin about 2-3 years in, we were like, this currency that somebody created that nobody knows does that inherently. It gives everybody with the internet connection the ability to have the same asset. And so we learned about it a few years in and found it to be pretty powerful. But we built a company in the commerce space. We were, I would say, pretty successful with it. We ended up getting acquired by our biggest customer, which is Pop Sugar, to come in and empower 1.2 billion in retail revenue.
Yeah.
and then we were then acquired again by an even bigger company called Rakuten, which is the biggest cashback company in the US and many parts of the world.
Yeah.
So the team and I got to learn about the cashback space, both while building Cosmic and then directly under Rakuten. And a lot of, it's like, it's never one thing that inspires you to create, something. It was a lot of little things, but Rakuten definitely played a big part in that journey.
Yeah, no, I love it. I told you a little bit before the call that my background is in retail commerce, and I can see how your mind would be able to shift towards where you're at through that journey. Especially with Rakuten being the largest cashback tech company out there. So super interesting. When you start thinking about how people think about Bitcoin overall, without sources like Lolli or getting this cash back, unless you are versed in the technology, it feels like there's a barrier there, right? And so what have you seen overall into call it like the sophistication of your user? I'm assuming at the beginning it was probably a very highly sophisticated Bitcoin user, and then like over time it's become like more broad. Just kind of curious on that overall.
Yeah, absolutely. When we started Lolli, we were thinking a lot about like the initial idea, actually before we even came to it, was how do we make Bitcoin more accessible to everybody? And so the obvious answer, was like, what we had been building at Rakuten and everything of like the cash back, but it almost felt like too obvious.
Yeah.
So we were like, it almost feels like too easy. But then the more research I did, I was like, why has nobody done this? People were like somehow like kind of playing in like loyalty token space, trying to create their own, cashback, but it's like that there's no real efficiencies that come from that. And there's no real reason to like launch your own token with something like this. So we very much learned a lot about and studied a lot about like the Rakuten customer. And one of the most interesting things that we came to was that there were so many rabid customers that like love cashback. Like
right.
we would have these all hands meetings with Rakuten, and people would get these like, we would get these like unsolicited videos that were like, I love my big fat check and like getting my free money and getting cash back. And when you see a user that just like loves a product as much as people love Rakuten,
Totally.
And then on the other side, we're in the Bitcoin community and we were way more like low key at that point. But we've been studying the space for years and been fascinated with the technology. And you see this like absolute rabid customer that's like, wants freedom, wants their own money. And when you believe in those principles and want to share those principles, you have to kind of think about how do you make those principles and like the difficult aspects of Bitcoin more approachable. And so we paired these two ideas of like cashback with the idea of sound money and giving people for the freedom, financial freedom through Bitcoin, and having economies of scale. You can distribute Bitcoin anywhere in the world where you can't distribute fiat everywhere. So we thought about this, and we're just like, gosh, it feels obvious, but why has no one done it? So we basically rebuilt Rakuten with the same team as Cosmic after we parted ways. And yeah, we've seen, knock on wood, but a lot of success so far with this model.
Nice. So are you building out the affiliate model yourselves? Oh, that's fast. That's awesome. That's actually, I don't, for people listening, I don't know if they realize like how big of a deal that is, right? A lot of people use, the affiliate models in different capacities have been done, but most of the times when people do that, they leverage someone else's, affiliate network. That's really interesting. And it's fantastic that you're building out your own affiliate, network.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, we don't really like talk about that a lot. And I think it's, I'm surprised because most podcasts I go on, they don't understand that world, which is fine. They don't really need to. And that's kind of the beauty of Lolli is like, you don't actually have to understand how it works in the back end to really understand. But like we have direct partnerships with our merchants, and we have a competitive advantage. My team and I have built a lot of credibility in the commerce space. And we've worked with just about every one of these merchants over the last 8 years, just about every merchant in North America at this point, and many parts of Asia and Europe as well. And so we kind of thought about like, what is our contribution to the Bitcoin space? What can we bring? And one of my observations is like how little adoption the Bitcoin payments has gotten. People like BitPay or Coinbase Commerce, they don't really have real distribution. And a lot of that is because of market forces. People don't want to pay with Bitcoin. They don't want to pay with crypto because as far as many people are concerned, when you're treating an asset as an investment asset, why would you go spend that asset? So if I, let's just, do apples to apples. If I were to go invest in literally Apple, like the stock, I'm not going to go take my stock that I just invested in and go buy an Apple computer with it.
Yeah,
totally. So the same is true with Bitcoin. I'm not going to like the first wave of adoption outside of miners for Bitcoin was investors. Yeah. All those people are not going to use Bitcoin in the masses to go spend this thing that they believe is an investment.
Right. Yeah. They're looking at it for the long-term value of it, not what it's at necessarily even today, but like, yeah, exactly. As an investment, what it's at 5, 10, 15, retirement type stuff.
So how we reach mass adoption, and this sort of further answers your earlier question, is actually reframing Bitcoin and to the mass to the masses. It's like, okay, well, Bitcoin is the greatest savings technology that the world has known over the last several decades. And if we can educate people that this is better savings technology as a rewards platform, show that these rewards can double, triple, quadruple over time, we already have beaten Rakuten, right? Like Bitcoin since we launched has already doubled. So we're hypothetically, for the users that have used us, twice as good as Rakuten. Mm-hmm. As that continues and we triple, quadruple Rakuten in value that we've given to our users, then we start, and Bitcoin can stable out, and stablecoin adoption, is more pervasive. We can offer people the ability to actually spend with more efficient means of exchange. We can give people the ability to seamlessly exchange their Bitcoin for stablecoins, give people the ability to actually pay with, fiat, digital money, and people are fine spending, their fiat. Like they don't care if it's a stablecoin, if it's fiat, they're used to spending money. And so if they can transfer in and out of a sound money into a more efficient means of transfer, which I think stablecoins will be a big part of that.
I agree.
They'll spend their stablecoin, they'll earn their Bitcoin, and it'll create this beautiful flow of funds for the consumer to be spending smartly and saving more intelligently with Bitcoin.
Yeah, this is super fascinating to me. You said something that I thought was interesting just at the beginning of all this is like how you don't get the chance to talk about the affiliate model relationship as much because most people don't understand that. So I love that we're talking about that because, like I said, I spent a lot of time in that space. And just real quick to level set for anybody that doesn't know what an affiliate model is or how affiliates work, the most easiest way you can think about an affiliate is you go to a blog and you see a product on there, and someone clicks on it, then the blogger gets an affiliate relationship, right? But like that actually happens in mass, and like like with what you guys do, basically is as people make purchase on these sites, there's essentially like for in the most simplest form, it's tracked via a link, right? And then you're getting an affiliate relationship or getting a percentage of that sale, and based off of that savings, or sorry, based off of that, you're also giving that back to the user, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Merchants pay us because we're incentivizing sales. So
Yep.
our users will shop at our merchants versus merchants that aren't on Lolli. And so
Exactly.
there's this loyalty cycle that occurs. And then when the merchants pay us, we pay our users sending Bitcoin to their Lolli wallets.
Yeah, exactly. And then again, the reason why, those listening might hear me like so fascinated by this is because building an affiliate network is not easy. And yeah, the majority of people that create affiliate relationships are leveraging Rakuten or, some other smaller, Rakuten being the largest there. I totally agree with you what you're talking about on the stablecoin aspect. I definitely very much see a world where each one of these merchants has their own stablecoin, and whether it's like this decentralized whatever, it's probably not. It's literally most likely going to be a wrapping of loyalty, right? It's like the new version of a loyalty point. And so like Visa, for example, they just created or they just announced a patent for a digital currency stable coin. And so in that example, it's like, hey, you earn points for credit card purchases, and then you convert those points into gift cards. You convert those things into other things. From a user perspective or from a Visa perspective, is if that's just, you can also use that to transact. So it seems like you guys are super positioned to be right in that space. Like as these companies and brands starts to think about like, hey, what does an in-network currency look like for us overall? I'm sure you probably thought of that, but it's super fascinating to me.
Yeah, and we're really excited about that. And I think that, yeah, someone like a Visa or MasterCard has a huge, they're the ones being disrupted in this moment because,
Yeah.
they have to pay a lot of money for these fees, because when you actually like understand the full commerce cycle of like how much money people actually spend for every transaction,
Yep.
these merchants get crushed because they're paying 2.5% in some cases, 3% plus 30 cents fees for transactions if you're a small merchant. And then you're paying, if you're like a Walmart even, you're still paying a point and a half, 1.5%
Yeah.
minimum for these purchases to transact. And this is like for the biggest merchants.
Totally.
So with a stable coin, hypothetically, and with Bitcoin really as well, aside from the volatility,
Sure.
you're essentially like paying nothing for this transaction to occur, and everything is validated by the network.
Right.
So you could hypothetically bring transaction costs down to zero, which is an incredibly important and transformative moment in commerce for anyone in the world to be able to transact anywhere. Is going to change the world.
Yeah. Oh, totally, totally. And like, just as like in Coinbase, for example, you can change from Bitcoin to USDC, right? And you can kind of fluctuate back and forth. I totally see a world where you can do that with, your Bitcoin to, I don't know, your Walmart stable coin, and go back and forth there, right? It makes a lot of sense. It's that natural evolution, like we're saying, of commerce.
Yeah, and I don't know if the individual merchants will be really leaders in that space.
Agreed.
Um, companies maybe the size of like Walmart and Amazon have the scale and the network for it to make sense, but most I don't think have the incentive to create their own stable coin. Most will rely off of like more network-based companies like Stripe,
Yep.
Visa, Square. I could see doing a stable coin. I think there's a lot of parties that have a lot to benefit from offering a more efficient medium of exchange.
Yeah, and I think you could probably think about it like the e-commerce business, right? In the sense that you have these larger companies like your Walmart, REI, Nordstrom, that have their own massive e-com teams, and then everybody else is using either Shopify, Magento, or BigCommerce or whatever, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, super
Yeah,
super interesting.
Shopify would probably have an incentive to do it
Exactly.
across their merchants, and Shopify just signed on as a Libra partner. So a lot of these people will, a lot of these companies will adopt, things stable coins like Libra, USDC, that already exist, and then I'm sure that Visas of the world, Mastercards of the world are going to want to have proprietary technology around it and want to own it themselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The whole commerce experience to me seems like the easiest adoption point for Bitcoin and just cryptocurrency overall. And again, when I think of cryptocurrency in this context for commerce, it's in the stablecoin context. I think it'll be difficult for any merchant to adopt any one of these altcoins as a medium of exchange because of the volatility and as well as the lack of liquidity.
Yeah, why would you? There's no real like I've yet to see a use case for an altcoin that makes sense. I mean, there's properties that like theoretically that ETH or ETH2 will make sense at scale. I could see like for gaming and like certain more centralized economies like games,
Yeah,
being able to create their own token system that expands them internationally and doesn't make have like has some sort of easier fiat on ramps into their own economies. But for the most part, most people should just use Bitcoin, and then people that don't use Bitcoin should probably just use stable coins. And honestly, like I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. Like I don't believe that like I can be the most long Bitcoin bull for the long term, but also believe in stable coins. And
I
I don't
totally
think
agree
that
with you.
they're contradictory thoughts. I think that there's a lot of people that like to portray this idea of being a Bitcoin maximalist, but when you talk to them off of Twitter, they actually believe in stablecoins. They actually believe and because really like stablecoins should be hypothetically the best segue into Bitcoin, because once you have an easy like the whole goal, the whole game of Bitcoin is like get people in the door.
Yep.
Like once you have a side by side comparison of a money that is highly centralized, highly controlled, and then with one click you can move that over to Bitcoin and you have something that is completely decentralized. It's just better money. It's a better
Totally.
store of value. So give people an easier on ramp into Bitcoin, and I'm for whatever that solution is, whatever that looks like. And stable coins will create a parity of almost every fiat currency, like like all day. Like go pair it with go put it on top of create an algorithm on top of just about any fiat currency, and it'll show like that currency is probably a joke. It's
Yeah.
literally like, okay, we created an algorithm on top of this currency that's highly centralized. It's like that is hilarious. And it's like, okay, well, what is money? And the
Yeah.
more you get people to question what money is, the better you get people into Bitcoin.
I totally agree. I love that point you're making. When I talk with people, I often say that I find myself on both ends of the paradigm. So like I'm very much bullish on Bitcoin and all the self-sovereign and decentralized aspects of having control of sound money is like why I like Bitcoin. But then from a business perspective, when I think about, hey, if I'm an operator of a business, if I'm, the product team of a commerce solution or a bank, I can totally understand why they want stablecoins because it makes their network operate more efficiently. And like you're talking about with the exchanges of transactions and eliminating that 1.5 to 3%, depending on the size that you are. So all the reasons why that works in that, and it's not competitive or it's not a threat or competition to Bitcoin, because no one from Bitcoin is going to be like, oh, I want to give up my, self-sovereignty and ownership of my currency to then invest in Visa digital currency.
Right.
But we do live in a world where we have to transact, and to be able to transact in that method, and people that hold Bitcoin very likely still transact using Visa or whatever method, is why wouldn't you want to get stable coins as credits, or why wouldn't you want to have a more efficient way? And then again, to your point, like you're saying, is bringing in new people to the space makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, as you think about the commerce trajectory overall, what are some interesting ways that you're finding or seeing people, I guess, getting more exploratory in the space? It's funny because I referred my mom, for instance, to Lolli, and like to her, like Bitcoin has always just been this crazy thing, and that she's doesn't even necessarily associate it to Bitcoin. She just associates it to that she's getting rewarded, right?
Exactly.
For the usage. And yeah, I we were talking about like there's not very many use cases that actually lend themselves to rewards the way that people want as much as commerce overall. So what are some kind of trends or things that you're seeing when it comes to how commerce is interacting with the space overall?
Yeah. I mean, I think anything that treats Bitcoin for what it is, that is a savings technology, is going to be successful. I think treating Bitcoin as a medium of exchange is a very difficult and uphill battle. I think that the frameworks are very, very important. The like things like Lightning are incredibly important for transactions, and we will eventually use Lightning when it makes sense. And most rewards companies will use Lightning when it makes sense, because we're adding to the network. We're buying an absurd amount of Bitcoin. We are transferring an absurd amount of Bitcoin to our users when people want to send it to their Lolli wallets, or their private wallets, personal wallets. So I think that rewards will power the next generation of this like medium of exchange. But those medium of exchange I think has to be built on rewards rails, because or savings rails. So technologies that use Bitcoin in a way of treating Bitcoin as a savings technology, I think, are going to be the most pervasive. And then those savings technologies will then transition into payment technologies in areas in which Bitcoin is more stable than your native currency. So if you look at take a step back, we're in the US, we're so lucky to have, the most stable currency in the world, which is the US dollar, albeit centralized. It is very stable.
Sure.
The entire world, would love to have the US dollar in their reserve, and they would love to have as much as possible, because any other fiat currency that's backed by the dollar is going to be pretty powerful.
Right. And in fact, a lot of them do, right? There's a lot of countries have actual vaults filled with dollar bills.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And a lot of people don't know that. It's like, when you look at what is money backed by, most governments are backed by the US dollar.
Yeah.
Or backed by, the fact that like the US dollar is still going to have value tomorrow and the next day. And it's probably going to, like, a dollar is probably, even though it's going to be inflated, because we're printing trillions of dollars,
sure,
it's really worth whatever the US says it is. So we are beholden to these same central powers, and in times like this, it shows, and it's like whoever's holding that dollar is probably going to be in an okay position. But the US dollar is not an asset that everybody can own and trade freely. Thus, it's not really a good store of value for most countries, because you can't have 100% of it, and it's out of your control. So if the US decides to put tariffs, you're basically paying a tax to transact with the US dollar. There's tons of trade restrictions. Basically, every country in the world would love to either have US dollar or some form of gold or some sort of stability to add value to their own currency. Then emerges Bitcoin. And so if you were to look at like any currency that is more volatile than Bitcoin, and I think last time I checked, Bitcoin was if it was on the same scale, it would be like the 33rd most stable currency in the entire world. Even though we look at it as being highly volatile, it is far less volatile than most currencies in the world.
Right.
So when you look on a macro scale, if I were to go give, like, let's just say we were to launch Lolli in Venezuela, Bitcoin, your savings technology, is actually a more efficient and stable form of currency than your existing currency.
Yep.
So you're going to want to earn something that is better money than your existing system, and you're going to want to transact with that too. So when Bitcoin goes from being like the 33rd most stable currency down to 15, down to 10, down to 5, down to a top 3, probably against the Chinese yen and the US dollar, then it becomes really fascinating when the entire world is basically choosing between US dollar, Chinese yen, digital dollar, and Bitcoin. That becomes really fascinating. And I don't know if that is in 10 years, if it's in 20 years, if it's in 50 years, but that world is extremely exciting and makes me really bullish for Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Because just like anything is, most things will start out with high volatility, right? Because it's just part of the overall adoption cycle. But you're right. Like as adoption increases, as the years go on, it should start to begin to stabilize even more, with that confidence. Um, yeah, I'm just super fascinated overall when it comes to how people think about, Bitcoin, especially from that commerce standpoint. So going on to what is happening in the world, and we're thinking about like these trillions of dollars being printed, and we're obviously in a really interesting time because of COVID-19, and arguably because of other things. Like for example, this week, Goldman Sachs said that they don't see this value in Bitcoin, basically, right? Or like telling people, and it's clear that there's levels of incentives as to why people make decisions, right? And so they're not necessarily incentivized right now to be offering Bitcoin to their client base if they're not able to trade it or sell it or make it available. Curious what your thoughts were on that recent conversation of the week.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand what everyone is optimizing for. If Goldman Sachs endorses Bitcoin, it creates this like almost negative ripple effect where they have to completely change their business model.
Yeah.
Like their entire business is around investments, and when you're disrupting your own investments, it's problematic. So if I'm running Goldman Sachs and I'm optimizing for my well-being as a company, I wouldn't endorse Bitcoin.
Right.
And like, yeah, they have no real incentive to. Like, their incentive is to promote their own investments and the things that they've, I don't think people realize how much money they have. It is
Yeah.
insane how much money that they control or influence. Like not even just the money they have, the money that they influence from other people's investments based on their
Yeah.
advice, it has got to be in the trillions and trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at something that, like a behemoth like that, you go invest, and endorse $100 million in Bitcoin, and then you offset your entire trillions of dollars of investments and advice, like you lose money. So
Exactly.
how do you make this sort of like seamless shift? It's like, I mean, I'm sure they have an entire team internally that's trying to figure out how do we make the shift into cryptocurrency investments, and what does that future look like? How do we take a meaningful stake of this new world? And like, this is very difficult stuff. Like there's a lot of financial engineering that you have to do, and to like not disrupt your current business. But yeah, I mean, like you look at the biggest companies in the world that haven't evolved, it's because they haven't figured out ways to replace themselves. And the companies that do evolve are the ones that figure out how to replace themselves and do it seamlessly.
Yeah. Yeah. You bring up excellent points there. Is, if there's built in the legacy financial system, and those are the services that they provide, for them to then introduce, Bitcoin, they either need to invest in the infrastructure to be able to sell that and support that within their own technology, or two, partner with someone else. So in both of those scenarios, they're giving up a level of margin to whoever is building that's different, or they could just essentially double down on what they're already doing and get people spending inside of that existing ecosystem, right? So yeah, shifting someone out of there, the incentives is just not fully there. The most simplest analogy, like we both have black shirts on, right? So if we're a company that sells black shirts, we're not going to go promoting, someone to wear the purple shirt, or maybe the purple shirt because of Lolli. Sorry. We're not going to, we're not going to be promoting someone to wear a green shirt, right? Because we sell black shirts. Like, why would we say buy green shirts if we don't sell green shirts? you know, and like as rudimentary as that might sound, it's like, you know, you are incentivized by the call it the inventory that you have of what you're presenting to the market.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what do you think? So I guess on that line, you know, you have these fintechs like companies like SoFi and Robinhood who have, you know, been more accepting and introducing Bitcoin. You know, it seems like obviously it's a good opportunity for them, right, to gain some interesting customers as a result. And they're much smaller than a Goldman Sachs anyway, so like they're able to take on some of that risk. Let's talk about that a little bit. Like, why do you think that they're willing to take that on as opposed to Goldman, opposed from like the obvious, of course, right? The legacy of 100 years of Goldman, right?
Because they're optimizing for different things. So it's the same principle. It's like they're optimizing for users, and like this is a great example. If you saw like the, you know, Square earnings, and they made half of their revenue off of Bitcoin transactions.
Crazy, yeah.
So every other fintech that's trying to compete with Cash App of like these neobanks, they're all sitting there being like, well, I want to make, you know, I want more revenue. And so when Bitcoin like I said, when Bitcoin becomes a better revenue stream, when it becomes a way for companies to make more money, they're going to invest in it.
Yeah.
I don't think, you know, a lot of these companies don't care about Bitcoin. they care about more users, and they care about making money from their users.
Yeah.
So, and that's fine. Like when you can align incentives with Bitcoin and these companies, this is great. So, you know, SoFi and Cash App and all of these companies that are adopting Bitcoin because they want more users, because it all comes down to the end of the day, they want that ad that says the easiest place to buy Bitcoin, the easiest place to earn Bitcoin. And
Yeah.
like if that ad is converting at like $50 and your competitor's ad that says, hey, get cash, like, you know, invest in stocks, and that one's converting at $100, you're gonna offer Bitcoin all day because you can acquire customers for half the cost. So again, like it comes down to what is everyone optimizing for? How do you get everybody, you know, on the same page and incentivized to like promote Bitcoin to more people? And it's just going to keep happening. More companies are going to realize the incentive. And unlike, you know, the difference between them and a Goldman Sachs, they're not you know, disrupting their current model. Somebody that comes in that would have invested in Apple, and if they can go invest in Bitcoin, they're winning on every transaction.
Yeah.
So they don't actually care. If they're going and making $1 off of every time that you invest in Apple and $1 off of every time you invest in Bitcoin, they don't give a shit of where, you know, where you're investing. They just want to give you more ways so that to transact, so they can make that dollar on every transaction.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I love your perspective on this. So what I've kind of said long is that it'd be interesting if a company like Coinbase or some of these crypto-centric companies started innovating, call it innovating backwards. And so what I mean by this is that, you know, for those of us in the space, like obviously we're super bullish on crypto and more particularly Bitcoin, but it's still a relatively small market cap in comparison to other things, of course, right? So one of the things I've kind of hypothesized on is it'd be really interesting if Bitcoin, or it's not Bitcoin, if Coinbase, for example, or some of these exchanges started offering the ability to purchase stocks. So like you said, like if these bigger companies, legacy companies don't give a shit if you spend $1 on Apple versus Bitcoin, you know, it seems like there's a really interesting opportunity for them to get new users, just going all back to the same thing, just doing it in the reverse. What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Explain that further.
Oh, sorry. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you know, if I'm at Coinbase and if I feel like I have a decent market share on the crypto side of things, I think it'd be really interesting to start thinking about how you innovate backwards to bring people back into cryptocurrency. So for example, like imagine like you're on Coinbase and you can buy Apple stock on your Coinbase account, or you're in Binance. And you're in Binance and you can buy Apple stock, or you can do some of these legacy systems in there. I haven't seen anybody talk about that, you know, from a company standpoint, like one of them figuring that out. So it's definitely something I'd love to to discuss, because I think that just becomes an interesting opportunity to gain new users. So since we were on this user acquisition journey, I was kind of curious, have you thought about that, or what your thoughts might be?
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think we kind of fit in that with that thesis and strategy in our own way, because we said, okay, we're not going to go invent our own like loyalty rails and go try to sell, this whole new like thing to somebody with a new token and everything. We're going to take a lot of existing legacy systems and take something that's everybody's familiar with, which is cash back, and say, look, cash back, we're just going to give you something better than cash.
Yeah.
So, and something that has gone up historically over time. So in the same way, Coinbase, they should totally figure out ways in which they can broaden their audience and get people into crypto. But really, like, I would say Cash App is probably doing the best job. They actually launched their Bitcoin product before they launched stocks. So before, all you could do is like send money, receive money, and then buy Bitcoin. So then they opened it up and they basically competed with Robinhood and had like, they just offered stocks. So the market share of Cash App and the activity around Cash App and the touch points around Bitcoin, thus touch points around Bitcoin, have expanded dramatically since they launched stocks. You can go buy fractional reserves of any stock, and then right next to it, you see, hey, there's a whole tab on Bitcoin. Like, that is the best ad for Bitcoin ever.
Totally. Yeah, I'd love to understand from Cash App sometime, just how performant things are comparatively, right? Like, because I didn't realize that they created the stock buying after Bitcoin. So it'd be interesting to see if like the people who buy Bitcoin also buy the stock, right? Or if it's like which way the adoption cycle goes. Is it from like transacting to buying stock to Bitcoin, or is it Bitcoin to stock back? I don't know. That kind of stuff is, I can nerd out about that at
Totally.
any point.
It's fascinating too. If you think about like the user journey around that, like, imagine touch points that say, hey, like if you had bought Bitcoin instead of Apple, you would be up 40%. And then,
Right.
and then it starts to be like, well, what is this Bitcoin thing? Like, why should I invest? Because like even day traders, a lot of them, before they invest in a stock, they want to learn all about it. So,
Right. Oh, totally.
we're all familiar with Apple. We're all familiar with like Tesla because we can see it, we can touch it. But like, you're going to go hear from a friend that Tesla's amazing for these principles, these properties, and you're going to say, oh, Tesla's awesome, I'm going to go buy Tesla stock. And like, Apple's amazing because we're on Apple devices and we use it every day. And it's like, of course, I'm going to go invest in a company that I like use and believe in. Bitcoin's the same thing. It's like, if I go see this stock that's side by side with all these things that I use, I'm going to want to go figure out why it's going up over time. And the more that you can question Bitcoin and question money, the better.
Totally. Well, Alex, before we wrap up, I'd love to talk to you a little bit more on the founder journey side, because you founded a company, sold the company, not starting, you've been doing this for a while now with this company. What did you notice differences between your first company and this company, particularly like when you were articulating the vision and when you were like speaking with investors and so forth? I'm assuming you probably had to bang your head against the wall a couple times on the investor side for Lolli, and I mean, we all do that with every company, of course, but I'd love to understand that differences that you've learned through both journeys.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the last company, it was hard. It was like, it was like you said, banging my head up against a wall, hoping that a door would emerge and you could just walk through it. But it's like building anything, from scratch is like very difficult. And I think that with the last company, one of the things we learned is like, we try to like will something into existence out of just the idea that it should exist. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the market was ready for something like that. Like even today, buy buttons, which is basically what we invented with the last company, you still can't buy seamlessly everywhere.
Right.
Like the last company was theoretically should exist. Like I should be able to buy anywhere and it should just press a button and purchase. And that was the idea behind Cosmic. That doesn't necessarily mean that the market is ready for something like that.
Totally.
And so it was like 3.5 years of like next to no progress. Like it was so difficult. We were just like scraping by with like consulting here, consulting there, building a custom solution, doing a, an API integration to, keep the company alive, and really just like bootstrapping like it for the majority of it. And in most investors, like I think saw that. They saw that like how difficult it was. They saw like, there weren't a lot of like patterns where true infrastructure technologies emerge and like change an industry. So I learned a lot about, I think the challenges that Bitcoin had. I saw, where Bitcoin I don't think was going to be extremely pervasive. Like we actually, tried to adopt Bitcoin a couple years into Cosmic as a payment rail, and basically kind of create probably a version of BitPay where someone could like pay with Bitcoin and merchants could receive it. And maybe it could have been a big business just because Bitcoin would have gone up over time, and that we could have probably raised a lot of money off of that. But I don't think it would have actually created a huge business, because it's like the timing wasn't right for Bitcoin as payments, as we talked about earlier. So I think I got a lot smarter, and ultimately, like, Cosmic worked, and we, everyone started talking about buy buttons, and you can get acquired if you are, the leader in space. So, and we had built, incredible team and incredible technology and we were ultimately acquired for that technology and the team to go build that internally at a bigger company. So we built something of value, but the mission and the vision that we set out to build was so big. And the reality of it is that we didn't exit for like what we thought we were going to exit for. We didn't create what we thought we were going to create. And the true impact that we thought we were going to have in the world was not what we ended up achieving. So one of the things I thought a lot about is almost being more realistic in my expectations about like, okay, I want this thing up here, but I have to be more strategic in the 10 moves that the chess moves I make to get there. Whereas the last company, I was like, we're just going to go have this vision. We're going to build this technology, and, somehow we're going to get there in between. With Lolli, we have, just about like 10 different routes to get there, and to get to this, mass adoption of Bitcoin, this hyper Bitcoinization that we all want to get to. And I think we have a lot of intelligent ways of getting to that path. And I would say like one of my, skill sets is pattern recognition. And I've just learned a lot from seeing other companies around me that have been successful or not successful. So I've just been more methodical about like the way that I've built. And I've done a lot of things right. I've built an incredible team. We're building with the same team as we built the last company. And so there's certain things that we identified that we didn't do wrong in the last company. We did, like with Cosmic, it wasn't about the team that we had. It wasn't about our ambition. It wasn't about our motivation, how hard we worked, the technology that we built. All of those things were right. And so when you build something the second time, or even, if people are thinking about it the first time, like it, I think it is important to think about what you're great at and what you're not great at. And so I think one of the things we thought about is like, okay, let's not try to reinvent the wheel. Let's not try to, fix things that aren't broken. So I think, knock on wood, I think that we've course corrected a lot with how we built Lolli, and we've already built a way bigger company than we built with the last company so far. Assuming, we're able to keep growing at the rate we're growing. But yeah, we've learned a lot, and I'm pretty happy with what we've built so far. But day one, lots to do.
That's awesome. Quick question on that, on the Lolli side is, what have you seen when you speak to an investor who understands Bitcoin versus one that doesn't? Does the one that doesn't understand Bitcoin still grasp Lolli, or are they a little less likely to kind of understand it?
Yeah. So the best investors are the best. The individuals that can recognize patterns. And that's, I think you could probably I think to almost like 99% accuracy, like that's probably like consistently the best people that make the biggest investments, see something that reminds them of something that has been successful, and then they invest in it in a new space, in a new way or whatever, but it's some sort of like pattern recognition. And it's humans as a whole. Like the reason why, we don't kill ourselves every day, like, from doing something burning, our hands on the stove. We saw that like we were burned before, and so we're not going to go touch the stove. And so humans naturally have that, in our heads, and some people lean into it, some people don't. And some people are incentivized to lean into it, like investors.
Yeah.
So investors that that understand reward space have invested in Lolli because they understand rewards, and they understand that if you can find a unique demographic and give them something of value, you can build a rewards company.
Right.
Completely aside from Bitcoin. Like
Sure.
if you say we're going to go give you gold, gold's not really like an easy thing to go give people, but like people want gold, so you could probably build a rewards company off of gold alone. And
Yeah.
so just thinking of that principle, you don't necessarily have to have people that align with Bitcoin. That said, something that I care deeply about is like, I want to, have control of my company. I want to have control of my vision. I don't want to, 5 years down the road for me to be arguing that Bitcoin has value to our investors that invested in us. I
Yeah.
want our investors to have believed in me, but also in this long-term vision that we have. And so I think we've done a good job of creating a syndicate of investors that believe with the long-term principles of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, coupled with the idea that rewards companies are extremely profitable, incredible businesses to build. And when you take those two and you combine them, that's the type of investor that we're optimizing for. The
Yeah.
investors that haven't understood what we're doing probably don't understand rewards. They don't like, most of the investors that we got turned down by, they didn't understand when I was telling them that Honey was a multi-billion-dollar company. Like I've been preaching and singing about Honey and singing the praises of Honey and Rakuten, and everyone's like, oh, the biggest, cashback company in the space only exited for $1 billion, and there's only one of them, and they own half the space. And yes, that is true, but when I'm going and saying that Honey is a $2 billion company and ultimately, was acquired for $4 billion, but when we were fundraising, I was telling everybody Honey is a $2 billion company, whether you like it or not. And they've gone and surpassed, eBay, Rakuten in many ways, and like created a new model off of a Chrome extension. And so every investor I got in this argument with about like, can you create something that competes with Rakuten Cashback? And so all these investors, because they don't have the patterns in place, they didn't see it. And like hundreds of investors passed on us because of that.
Yeah.
So like when Honey goes and exits for $4 billion, all those same investors that I did my Babe Ruth point to left field and said, look, Honey's worth this. We're going to, we're coming after them. We're going to go build something transformative in the space with a lot of the same patterns that we saw with them in Rakuten. Like, I'll go say that all day, and we got enough people to believe in us to say that is true.
Yeah.
All those investors have come back, and some of them now believe in it. I don't necessarily believe in them if they don't believe in me, and if they don't believe in what we're building. But you start to build these relationships of like people that believe in you as an individual, come back and say, hey, you were right, and we believed in this, and now we want to invest in you. But yeah, you just kind of have to build your path and build what's right for you, and have confidence in the path that you're building towards.
Yeah. No, I love that story, because it's often that maybe a first-time founder will get feedback from an investor and not understanding that, right? That like you have to essentially weight the feedback of what you're getting based off of the investor's capacity to understand what you're doing. So yeah, if someone doesn't understand rewards and doesn't see patterns, like you're saying, which I think is a really good way to kind of put it, is that pattern recognition, then yeah, you probably shouldn't weight their opinion on what they're saying. Now, if someone's like, invested in Honey and invested all these things, and they're maybe telling you something, obviously you're going to put more weight in that because that's how you're modeling it. So I love that. I love that little lesson there.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's I would say like, yeah, I mean, you have to it's a numbers game. Like you have to talk to, you have to bang on every door. You have to talk to every investor, and it's never easy.
Yeah.
It gets easier because you have a higher hit rate, but like I'm still, every round I've raised, I still get turned down by 100 investors. Like
Sure.
you have to be fueled by that and inspired by that. And like, I love proving people wrong. It is
Totally.
like way too high on my totem pole of things that like motivate
It's
me.
the best. It's the
It's
best.
the best. It's like, go tell me like I'm wrong, and I will come back a year later and show you our numbers and be like,
Yeah.
okay, like you write me a check.
Totally. Yeah. I advised this founder for a little while who's in the VR space, and I remember he told me that he was meeting with an investor, and the investor just told him like VR is not a thing, it's never going to be a thing, he doesn't get it. And I was like, why didn't you just end the meeting right there? Like, oh,
Yeah,
you obviously don't understand. I'm not here to teach you about VR,
yeah,
and because I think people spend so much time or too much time trying to convince people that won't buy in as opposed to finding the people that will buy in, right? Like if you just spent that same amount of time finding more of the people that could buy into the system or that you're creating, you probably find more success in that.
totally. And like I don't love the narrative. Like look, like different people have different, challenges raising, and like I think that there's, minorities and women have like, the odds stacked against them because like I said, patterns.
Yeah.
um if investors don't see, the pattern of a female founder, because they haven't seen any billion-dollar exits from a female founder, then it's going to create, like, whether they admit it or not, it's going to create this like negative pattern recognition in their mind, and thus it's like a never-ending cycle. So I think that a lot of VCs are like making, investors are making progress in starting to see that, like, okay, that's a negative pattern recognition. Like women and people of color can build massive businesses. It's like that is in no way is that like a correlation. And so, hope like that is trending in the right direction for sure.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of times where, like, yeah, patterns are don't make sense, and you have to go against the grain. And great investors will see what the proper patterns are and what the negative correlations are. Yeah, so yeah, I think that everyone, like, I'm not trying to say like, like I've
Sure,
never
sure.
had an easy time, fundraising, but like I understand that I have certain advantages because I've built something before.
Definitely.
And so yeah, it has gotten easier, but it's never easy.
Sure, sure. No, awesome. Alex, this has been a great conversation. The last question I love to ask my guests is simply, what's a question that you have that you would like to ask our audience that they can think about as they go about their day?
How can we improve? I would love, yeah, I mean, I always like welcome feedback. My personal DMs on Twitter are always open. Our company's DMs are always open. support@lolli.com is our email. Yeah, so I'm always like, if we have any users in the audience or people that are thinking about, how can I get Bitcoin, encourage them to check us out. And we're an open book. Like we move very, very fast. We like our team works incredibly hard. So we're always looking for ways to improve. And yeah, this is a community effort. If you follow us on Twitter, we're super active. We're always like sharing stats and data around what we're building. So I want to create as transparent of an organization as possible. So yeah, the question is like, how can we do better? And like, what do you guys want to see, with the platform moving forward?
Excellent, excellent. And Alex, what are the best ways that people can get in touch with you or Lolli? I know you said your DMs are open or so forth, but what are some handles or places that they should be going to?
Yeah, so Try Lolli is the company account. My account is my name, Alex Adelman. And then support channel is always open. I'll hop in there a lot too, and sort of, check out support, make sure like, customers are happy. And so, yeah, I think that those are probably the best ways. And then lolli.com, LOLLI.com, for, just downloading the app. Yeah, check us out and let us know how we're doing.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thanks again, Alex.
Thanks
Uh,
for having me, and I appreciate all the great questions and great conversation. And I have a million questions for you as well. So if I end up starting a podcast, we should do this, or we should just have a call on the side.
I'd love to. I really would. I'm a big fan of what you're doing. Like I said, I'm super familiar with the space, and I'm again, people don't realize how difficult it is to build a affiliate network. So I think that's pretty awesome that you're doing that. Everybody, thank you for listening to another episode of the TF podcast. Please make sure that you are liked and subscribed wherever you're listening to this, and do us a favor and fill in those stars. It goes a long way to making sure that we get our podcast in front of other people as well. You can follow me at JG Product, and please go to our site, tflabs.io. Thanks for listening, and we'll see y'all soon.